Alright, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. So let us silence down inshallah and begin where we left off. We were talking about the harms of the tongue and how our tongue can be used in the wrong way, and it's actually a very dangerous weapon, not even a tool but a weapon. So continuing on, we finished lying and backbiting, and now we will talk about the other form of backbiting, which includes lying, which is slander, in a little bit more detail. So let us take a look at some of those things. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَيْلٌ لِكُلِّ هُمَزَةٍ لُمَزَةٍ, woe to every fault-finding slanderer. Now what that means actually is, woe, waylun, means that these people better be very careful, because anyone who falls into this category, they're going to be in a very bad reputation or a very bad situation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason why it mentions fault finding is very telling actually, because when people try to find faults in others on a regular basis, they usually end up expressing them. And when they end up expressing them, either they're going to end up backbiting or they're going to end up slandering as well at the same time. So we need to be very careful about both of these. The Prophet ﷺ said, a slanderer will not enter paradise. لا يدخل الجنة قتات. Person who goes and slanders other people will not enter Jannah. So it's a very, very serious threat about these characteristics that we have of slander in particular. So let us look at what to do. First of all, just going on this, slanderer, if you think about what slander is, we've already defined it, what it is. Who remembers what the definition of slander is? Yes. And that, yes, exactly. Anything that you say about a person behind their back that is not true, that he or she would dislike when they hear about it. Okay, that's slander. Now if you look at slander actually, most of you are familiar with at least one instance or a few instances in your life. Think about how bad it got, how bad slander actually became. Telling lies about one person and another person. It's so bad that it can break up entire families. It's so bad that it can break up entire governments. Entire empires can be destroyed from the leadership level through slander of this person, slander of that person. And that's why we always talk about how powerful the media is. The media is this powerful and that powerful, because they're slandering people left and right. Or they're misleading people, which is a form of slander as well. So this is a very, very powerful way of ruining people's lives. So the harm that results from slander is something that should never be taken lightly. And I'll just give you one story, which I didn't put it in the notes, but there's one story reported by one of the early scholars of Islam. Whether the story is true or not, I don't know, but it's likely it could be true. So he said that there was one person who was really a big troublemaker. And they used to go and just cause problems between this person, and they would whisper something about that person. So this person decided that, you know what, I'm going to mess up this family. This husband and wife, they love each other, family relationships going good, I'm going to do something to them. So he went to the wife and he told the wife, he said, you know what, your husband doesn't really love you anymore. And in fact, I've got some news that he's trying to marry that other person and he's going to divorce you. So the woman was heartbroken. She said, I can't believe this is happening. And he comes up with whatever fake evidence that he had to convince her. So she's convinced. Her husband doesn't love her anymore. And he said, but you know what I can do for you? I can do something to help you. I can instill the love of you back into his heart. So, but what I need is I need your help. So he was, he was telling her that I can do some kind of black magic or some kind of whatever it is. So he said, what I need you to do is I need you to cut off one of the hairs from his beard. You cut off some hair from his beard and you bring it to me, and I'm going to do some kind of special black magic so that he falls in love with you again. And this is a form of black magic. You need to get something from the person or something like that. So this woman was convinced. Then he goes to the husband and he says, you know what? Your wife, she's been cheating on you. She's been cheating on you with this other guy, and you know what? If you don't, if she gets caught, If somebody finds out, and some people are already finding out, then she's going to try to kill you in order to cover it up. So your wife is trying to kill you. So the husband was convinced. He was thinking, my wife is trying to kill me. Really? I thought we were such a good relationship. The husband is convinced now my wife is trying to kill me. So what ends up happening? One day, while he's sleeping on his bed, the wife comes with a razor blade to go and cut off some hair of the guy's beard. He wakes up and he sees her and he kills her. That's a story of how dangerous slander can be. And this story might have actually happened. It might have actually happened. This shows you believing something. Imagine his reaction. He's thinking, my wife is trying to kill me. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. And then you see a razor blade and you're half asleep and you wake up. What would you do? Alright? So it's a very serious. So slander is a very, very serious thing. So how do we respond to it? What should we do about it? We already know its harms. What should we do about it? If you hear a false accusation about somebody, okay? Or even if you hear an accusation but you're not sure if it's true, what should you do? Number one, you should investigate the person who's telling you this news. Investigate them to see if they're even a person who's worthy of being believed or not in the first place. This is very, very important. So investigate, check, and make sure that this person is, really, really credible. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, when a person who you're not sure about comes to you with some information, you have to verify it. You have to double check it. So that's the first thing. Number two, admonish them. Right? Tell them, admonish them if you find out that they're lying. When you find out that they're lying or you have a hint that they're lying, you tell them, stop doing this. This is your responsibility. It's not only that you say, okay, I don't believe it. You have a responsibility to admonish them. And if you find out that even if it was true, but there was no need for you to tell them, like backbiting, then admonish them as well. You have a responsibility to tell them to stop. Number three, hate that action for the sake of Allah. In fact, Imam Ghazali, he says, hate that person for the sake of Allah. Because a slander is so bad that someone who's hated in the sight of Allah should be hated in your sight as well. Unless they change. Unless they change. So hate that person or that action as well. Why? So that you can actually counter the sweetness of that gossip that you might be tempted with. See, gossip is very tempting. It's very sweet. People like to hear, oh really? That person did this? What else did they do? Oh, they did this? Oh, what else did they do? And you try and get more and more, and it's very interesting. So in order to make sure that you don't fall into that trap, you should be hating that thing, and you should be hating that person for the sake of Allah. When you have the hatred for gossip, you're just like, I don't even want to hear it anymore. It's like something that's, tasty for you turns into something that tastes disgusting. Your favorite food turns into your most disliked food. And you have the ability to change your tastes. And you have the ability to change it in this. Number four, don't believe that person. Meaning, don't start thinking bad about someone, the person who was mentioned in front of you. Don't start believing and say, maybe if it's true. Is he really like that? I never thought about that, but maybe. And then what are you going to start doing? You're going to start checking. And you're going to start watching. Does he really do that? And you're going to start spying on that person. And you're going to be observing them to figure out some fault. Don't do that. Just put it away and brush it aside completely so that you don't start spying on other people. Number five, one is don't believe it. Number five is don't spy and try to investigate based upon what you've heard. Unless it's necessary, meaning it's something very important. Something that, this person is taking drugs and I need to go and help them quit or something like that. That's different. Or it's a family member of yours and you need to get them help. Other than that, don't start investigating. Say, oh, do they really do that? Or was he really hanging out? Did I really see him at that place? Would he really hang out like a place like that? Don't do any of these things. Number six, don't share that information. Don't fall into the same trap as what the other guy fell into and start going and telling other people. And this is very common. You know what? I'm not sure if it's true, but I heard that brother, he does this and this all the time. I'm not really sure. And then you go to the next person, guess what I heard? Oh, I don't know if it's true, by the way. But I heard that this sister, she does such and such thing. Why do you have to go and share that? There's no need. So you're doing the same thing that the other person is doing. So you need to be very, very careful about that slander. Okay? Now we'll take questions at the end because we need to cover this. Inshallah, write down your questions if we have questions. Next category is useless speech. Speech which has no benefit. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He does not utter a single word, meaning no one utters a single word without an ever-present watcher watching over him. Every single word that we speak, every single thing that we say, there's somebody monitoring. There's somebody writing all of it down for us. So we need to be very, very cautious and very careful about what we say. The Prophet ﷺ said, from the good qualities of Islam is to leave that which doesn't concern you. Something that is not your business, something that doesn't really, it's not important for you, it's not needed, it's not your field, whatever it may be. The good quality of Islam is to leave that. A true Muslim, a proper Muslim, should leave those things. Okay? So, how do you focus on these things? How do you develop these things? This is something that you have to realize, that your speech is like your wealth. Everyone has some money, there's some wealth. They have some money in their pocket, they have some money in their bank account. Now, if you have wealth, what do you do with that wealth generally? You're going to spend it on something which is going to benefit you. Right? You go and you buy things that you need, you buy food, you buy some electronic devices, you give some in charity because you know it's going to benefit you, all of these things. Now, you can potentially spend it on something which might hurt you, right? Like for example, you go and you buy a knife, and then somehow you take that knife and you buy poison, right? You buy some poison and you put it in your house, and all of a sudden it's just spreading around, it's just harming you, right? So why would you do that? Why would you would never spend it on something which hurts you? That's something which is speech which is prohibited. All the speech which is haram in Islam is spending that wealth that you have on things which are prohibited. Now, you say, okay, that's haram. But useless speech, is it haram? No, it's not. It's not haram. It's not prohibited in Islam. But would you go and buy a broken computer and bring it home and just have it sit there? Would you go and buy a broken phone? I'm going to go buy a broken phone and I don't need the parts or anything. I'm just going to have it. I'm going to keep the phone with me. One phone in my pocket. I really like this phone. It's nice and broken, and I'm just going to keep it in my pocket. This person's crazy. Why would you buy a phone if it's not going to do anything? It's the same thing. Whenever you speak about something that's useless and has no point, what you're doing is you're taking your wealth and you're spending it in something that you could have actually used that money for something beneficial. And instead, what did you do? You bought something that had no benefit at all. That's the person who speaks with useless talk or something which is not necessary at all. So every moment of life is an opportunity to earn reward. And that's the way we should understand things. So let's take a look at two more examples, just to make the point clear, if this analogy was not sufficient. Imagine you own a business. Right? You own a business and you have capital. Capital means the money that you're able to invest in that business. And what are you supposed to do with the capital? You're supposed to do what? Invest it in order to make what? More what? More capital, which becomes what? It's called profit. Exactly. It's called profit. So the whole point of having capital is in order to make profit. Invest it in order to make profit. Now, what happens if your business starts going down? You start losing your capital, and then all your capital is done. How can you make profit now? Let's say you change your mind, you say, you know what, now I really want this business to be successful. We're going to start making some profit. You can't make profit if you don't have capital. The same thing, if you have all this opportunity to speak, and you keep spending it in useless things, you won't have any left. So now you can't earn any reward because all you were speaking was useless things. So this is the same kind of analogy. The last analogy is, imagine somebody walking into a mine, like a cave, and there's gems on the floor. Imagine there's diamonds and rubies and there's gold and all of these things are on the floor. And this person walks in and is looking around and he's got a little bag and he starts collecting the dust. He collects the dirt on the floor and he's putting it in. He's picking up the dirt and he's putting it in. And he walks out with a bag of dirt. Right? This person's the most foolish person in the world, right? This person's crazy. What's wrong with this person? He could have picked up the gems, but he picked up the dirt instead and he walked away. You'd say this person is crazy. But every single time somebody speaks about something that's useless, and they have the opportunity to use their tongue to say something that's beneficial and earn a reward, or at least have some good for the other person who's listening, They've just lost that opportunity, and it's like them putting dirt in their bag and walking out when they could have picked up those jewels, when they could have said something nice, when they could have, reminded the person of Allah. They could have, admonished the person. They could have, they stayed silent and remembered Allah. All of these things, it's like doing that. And you say, that's foolish. But then you look at yourself, and we're going to look at ourselves in this class. You look at yourself, and you say, yeah, I do that all the time. And you say, this is like me putting that dirt in the bag and walking out. Think about that. Think about that, and then think about the things that you say. Another thing is make profit, picking up jewels, more accounting. Another thing is that a person who speaks a lot, right, a lot of useless things especially, even if they're not haram in Islam, on the Day of Judgment, you're going to have to account for every single word. Every single deed, every single action, every single word. Now think about, on the Day of Judgment, when you're standing there and you're in front of Allah and you're having to account, people are going to be stressed out. People are going to be in a very difficult situation. The more you have to account for, the longer your period of accounting is going to be. If you own a business, the IRS comes to audit you, and you have 1 million transactions in that business, it's a very difficult thing for that person to go through every single one, and you're thinking maybe something is in there. Maybe something is in there. So it's the same thing. One more thing to motivate you to be careful of useless talk is that your account on the Day of Judgment will become longer because you speak more and more things which are not beneficial. So, remembering that there is no sin on a person who engages in useless talk, but these people could have actually made an opportunity to benefit in some way. It's not that it's prohibited in Islam, but you could have done something so much better in order to earn good deeds. So, Imam Ghazali says silence might have been better for you. Silence would have been better. Why is silence better though? See, if silence doesn't bring harm or benefit, and speaking useless things about useless things doesn't bring harm or benefit, then why is silence better? It's a question. Yes. Okay, because you're not allowing other people. Perhaps there's something beyond that. Okay, that's one of the very good points, yeah. So one, so you don't fall into another sin with your tongue. There's a second point though.
In silence, you're listening to other people, or you pay attention to
Right, when you're silent, you're listening. Right, that's one thing. So that's a benefit. Did anyone read the notes, by the way? Okay. So who knows from the notes? Reflection. So one is, see, the thing is, when you're silent, when a believer is silent, they have an opportunity for reflection. They have an opportunity for thinking about things. They have an opportunity for planning things. So the silence of a Muslim is not just silence because I have nothing to say, because I am actually doing something as well. But you're just not doing something that has a potential to be so harmful. So that's another reason. Okay, that's another reason. Here's a test. The criteria to distinguish between what is beneficial or what concerns you, what doesn't concern you, what is beneficial, what is not beneficial, is to try to stay quiet one time. Just do this test yourself if you want to check yourself. Try to stay quiet on something you're about to say, right? And then think, is there any harm or benefit in what I was about to say? So if I stayed quiet, if I didn't make this speech, if I didn't say these words, and if I stayed quiet, would there have been any more harm or any more benefit, or any less harm or any less benefit? Either in this world or in the next world. Meaning either some benefit somebody gets in this world, or some benefit or harm that someone will get in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you go and you talk to somebody, let's say for example, you ask somebody how you're doing. Is that useless speech? Who says, yes it is? Raise your hand. Who says no? Who can justify why it's no? The justifications are gone. Yes.
If you're genuinely
Exactly. Good clarification. If you're genuinely concerned about them, then it wouldn't be useless speech. Let's say you're not genuinely concerned about them. Then it is useless speech? Yes. Anyone disagree? Disagrees. Why? Because you make the person feel better. So you may not get a reward for it, but technically you're making the person feel better, even if you didn't care, although you should care. Even if you didn't care, you made the person feel better, and the criteria is what? Whether it's beneficial in this life or the next. So it may not be beneficial in the sight of Allah. Even if it became habitual, you just ask people like that. But it may make the other person feel better, so it's not considered useless talk. It's not considered useless talk. Okay? So this is a reminder. When you do this test on a regular basis, it's a reminder that you don't need, this is from Imam Ghazali's book. I like this reminder. It says, remind yourself, you don't need to share every single story that you've ever heard in your life. You don't need to share every experience that you've encountered with everybody else around. So this is something that people tend to exaggerate a little bit in. Sharing a story or sharing an experience is perhaps an important thing, but going to excess is something that will definitely fall into useless talk. Now there are three main causes of why people engage in useless talk. The first one is they desire to know something which is not necessary for them to know. People just want to hear that something.
They enjoy the company of the other person so much that they just want to keep speaking. They just want to keep talking.
And that's something it's understandable, but it can lead to useless talk. If you look at the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam, when he was speaking with Allah directly, Musa is Kalimullah, the one who Allah spoke to directly. So when he was speaking to Allah, Allah asked him a question. He says, what is that in your hand, O Musa? If you know the story, we're going to cover it in the other class. He said, O Musa, what is that in your hand? And he was holding his stick. So he started explaining. So, this is my stick, and I walk with it, and I use it for this, and I have other uses. So scholars said, why is Musa going off and talking in detail about this stick? The only point that Allah was trying to make is ask him, what is that stick? He was going to say, it's a stick. And he says, no, I'm going to make the stick turn into a serpent. I'm going to make it turn into a big giant snake. That was the whole point. Why did Musa start talking just keep on talking and talking? Because because he loves Allah. And when you love Allah, you don't want that person to leave. You want to talk as much as possible to extend the conversation as much as possible. So he says, this is something understandable when obviously Musa is speaking with Allah. But when you love somebody or you enjoy somebody's company, you want to keep on speaking and speaking with them. But sometimes it can result in useless talk. So you need to be careful about that to make sure it does not get into exaggerated such that you cannot earn any other good deeds because all your time is gone. And number three, and I feel this is very, very common today, this is probably the most common reason, is that people want to pass their time away so that they don't fall into boredom. They just have nothing to do. So you find people talking all the time about, I have a few hours to kill, let's go and talk about something. So there's no purpose or there's no reason behind it or there's no mutual brotherhood or anything like that. It's just, let's just find somebody to talk to. And then when that person is done, I have nothing else to do, I'm going to go find the next person I can talk to. So I don't get bored. Or I'll just go and entertain myself with a movie or something like that. So this is becoming more and more common. So we need to be careful about these things. So what is the remedy for these things? The remedy for useless talks, first of all, is to remember that we're here for a reason. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us for a reason and that we will be judged for every single thing that we've said. So if you reflect upon your deeds and you remind yourself that you're in need of more good deeds on your scale. If you're honest with yourself, we all need more good deeds on our scale. Right? So rather than just saying, well, at least the bad deeds aren't coming up, we want to tip the scale with good deeds so that inshallah ta'ala we can enter Jannah, we can enter paradise. So we need to reflect upon this and also remember that somebody who engages in useless talk usually falls into harmful speech more easily than somebody who does not engage in such talk. And they're going to be accountable for that. So therefore, it's important to train yourself to either speak something good or remain silent, and to always reflect before you speak. Always think and stop and reflect before you actually start speaking. So let's take an example of how speech can be useless, just to demonstrate how much useless speech actually exists in the world and in ourselves as well. So somebody came and asked, imagine somebody came and they asked you, did you fast on a certain day? Somebody says, Tuesday. It didn't look like you ate. Are you fasting? Somebody asked you this question. Now, if you say yes, what did you do? You just revealed an act of worship between you and Allah, and it might result in you showing off. And it would have been better, actually, if you had kept this private. If this had remained private, it would have been better for you, right? Because there's less chance of you showing off, so it would have been better. If you say no, I'm not fasting, then you're lying. So you can't do that either. If you remain silent and you don't say anything, then the person's going to think that you're ignoring him. And he's going to get upset at you. So now you have a problem as well. If you evade the answer and you try and change the subject, that requires a lot of mental energy. That requires a lot of effort, right, to change the subject on the person. So now it makes your life more difficult, right? So the point of this example is, the question is a type of useless speech. And you just cause difficulty. The person says yes, there could be a problem. The person says no, there could be a problem. If he doesn't answer, there could be a problem. If he changes the subject, there could be a problem as well. So there's a problem either way. So be very careful in the things you ask about and the things that you speak. We'll leave that for the questions, inshallah. I'll explain that. So the same applies to people who ask all sorts of questions. What happened to such and such person? Or what happened to this? Unless it's important or necessary that you know. Okay? If you don't need to know, then you don't ask. So basically he says that there's a general remedy. The general remedy is to remember that death is near and that you're going to be held responsible for every word that you speak. Okay? And your tongue, imagine it's like a fishing pole. Right? Here's another analogy for you. It's like a fishing pole. When you go and you throw a bait and you throw a fishing pole out and you're waiting to catch something, right? What are you trying to do? You're trying to catch fish. You're not just there to sit. Right? You want to catch something. So catching good deeds is like your tongue catching something, catching a fish with that pole. If you catch nothing, you're not going to get anything. So you need to be, thinking about, how can I do something beneficial? How can I speak and say something that's going to actually be of some kind of benefit? So that's a general remedy. Then there's a practical remedy. Practical remedy is to either do one of two things. Either seclude yourself for a period of time in order to get yourself back into the habit of speaking good things. Because once you become accustomed to certain types of gatherings, or you become accustomed to doing all of these things, then it becomes natural for you, and you need to readjust yourself. You need to bring yourself back. Now this is not a permanent solution. This is a temporary solution. It's like a detox type of diet, right? You're not supposed to stay on that type of diet for a very long time. It's temporary. So it's the same thing. Or you set a reminder for yourself to talk less until you start speaking about things which are better. Now, what's an example of a reminder that we talked about last week, that one of the companions used to do? You don't have to do the same one. Pebble in the mouth, Abu Bakr, right? So you could do the same thing. You could put a timer, you could do whatever it is, something to remind yourself that you need to be a little bit more careful when you're speaking. Now, the last note is on this point is that the remedy, this type of practical remedy may be more difficult for people who are inclined to speak more. There are some people who speak more and there are some people who speak less. There are some people who speak a lot, very social, and there are some people who are very quiet in nature, generally. So the people who are more social in nature, it's going to be more difficult for them. It's going to be more difficult for them naturally. But at the same time, they have to realize two things. Number one, the more effort they put, the more reward they get. And number two, the fact that they have this ability or they have this nature of speaking more or being more social has a lot of benefits. And it can be used in a way, when you train yourself to speak in something good, that can be used in a way where the person who's shy or doesn't speak very much will not be able to benefit in the same level. So you have to realize it's an ability that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given. It's like strength. People who are strong, they're able to inflict a lot of damage for the bad, and they can also inflict a lot of damage for the good and stop tyranny and stop oppression. So it's something that people need to be very careful about. Ibrahim at-Taymi, let's look at some statements of some of the scholars. He says, when the believer wants to speak, he first thinks deeply. If it's correct, meaning if what he's about to say is good, then he'll speak. Otherwise, he will stay silent. On the other hand, someone who's insolent has a very loose tongue, and they just keep on speaking and speaking. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, one of the Khalifas, very prominent, died in 101. He said, my fear that I will indulge in vain talk prevents me from speaking much. So people used to ask him, you're the Khalifa, you're the ruler of the entire Muslim empire. Why don't you speak very much? You don't seem to talk too much. And he said, this was his response. My fear that I'm going to do something useless actually prevents me from speaking much. I want to speak in things which are good. And he was known as the fifth rightly guided Khalifa, meaning one of the very prominent figures, which we'll study next quarter of his life, inshallah. The next danger is excessive speech. Excessive speech is a little bit different than useless speech. Excessive speech is when you talk more than is necessary. So for example, whatever you could express, now this is a very literal and tough statement. Okay, but this is a theoretical statement more than it is a practical statement. Whatever can be fully expressed in one sentence should not be expressed in two sentences. Whatever can be said in one word should not be said in two words. Now that's very difficult. But at the same time, we have to realize that, what do you call it? Colloquial language, or the culture in which we live, makes us express ourselves in certain ways. So if we were to express ourselves in a way that we're trying to summarize the actual amount of words that we use, it will never have the same effect that it would have, had we said it the way we would naturally say it. So this is not to imply that you don't speak naturally in the type of culture that you live. It simply implies that you do not excessively speak on something where it's not necessary and the point has already gotten across. And there was no need for the extra reminder, or there was no need for anything additional to that. So the difference between the two, if you want, the reason why there are two separate categories. Useless speech is that which is something which has no harm or benefit. Excessive speech is when you say something and the point is already been said. Everything that needed to be said has already been said. And now in the same topic or the same conversation, you're adding more. Or within the same sentence, you're adding extra things. So sometimes people will do that. So interesting reminder is that the irony of it is if we actually consider our speech to be part of our wealth in life, then we find that people always withhold excess wealth. They withhold excess money, but they never withhold excess speech. They're always willing to give out their capital and give out their wealth of speech to other people. But when it comes to money, they're always trying to keep it to themselves. So that's something to remind you to be careful of this. So one way to test yourself. Okay, here's an example of excessive speech. One way to test yourself is to see whether you not have this problem by, if you're in a gathering and someone has a question, or you need to speak about a certain topic, and there's somebody else who has the opportunity to speak about the same topic and address the same thing, everything you had to say, a few other people in the gathering could have said the same thing. And you tried to stay quiet just as a test. And you were unable, and you just had to be the one who was going to speak. That's a form of excessive speech. Meaning what you had to say was already going to be said. Or maybe it had already been said, but you just want to say it again, just because it's coming from you or whatever other reason. That's a form of excessive speech. That's one test. that you can find. I couldn't think of any other tests for like sentences and all of that. If you come up with one, please let me know, inshallah. Not now, let me know via email. Let's look at some of the statements. Amr ibn Dinar, scholar, he said, a man, oh no, sorry, not a scholar, a companion. A man talked too much in front of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, the Prophet said to the man, how many barriers does your tongue have? How many barriers does your tongue have? He said, my lips and teeth. Meaning your tongue is here, which you need to speak. How many barriers, how many hijabs does it have? How many covers does it have? Well, my teeth are covering it, and then my lips are covering it. So the Prophet ﷺ said, aren't they sufficient? Meaning he's trying to tell the person, should have kept your mouth shut. You know, and he's saying in a way such, was that not enough? Do you need another barrier on top of it? You know, like some duct tape to seal your mouth? That would have been sufficient for you from speaking, because this man was speaking excessively and there was no need for it. Ibrahim, one of the early scholars, he said 2 things can easily destroy a person: excessive wealth and excessive speech. Not that they're necessarily prohibited in Islam. They're not haram in Islam. It's not haram to have excessive wealth. It's not haram to have excessive speech, as long as it's not bad. But there are 2 things which can destroy people, because it gets to people and it causes them to get involved in things which are going to lead to very bad consequences. The next harm is arguing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and speak nicely to people. In the Quran, that's all he said. And speak nicely to people. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the most hated of all people to Allah are those who are the argumentative fighters. They like to quarrel and just debate and argue with people in a tough way. Ibn Abbas, the companion, he said, even if Fir'aun were to speak nicely to me, I would have responded nicely to him. The worst evil, one of the worst people that ever existed on the face of the earth, the Pharaoh, that even if he spoke nicely to me, I would have spoken nicely to him. Even whatever his situation is. Meaning that we're not going to sit there and debate and argue with him and show a mad face and all of these things. Malik ibn Anas, he said, arguing hardens the heart and it sows hatred. It makes your heart hard so that you're not as soft with people, and it sows hatred in you from the other person. So when somebody argues with you start to hate that person. And when you argue with them, they start to hate you as well. So be careful of argumentation. So let's take a look at the definition of arguing. The definition of arguing for what we're talking about right now is that you engage in a dispute which has no beneficial objective at all. So you're in some kind of debate or argument or dispute, and there's no real beneficial objective to that. So another definition would be to object to another person's opinion by criticizing the other person, criticizing their words, or criticizing their intentions without any need. Without any need. Now, there's a permissible type of arguing. The permissible type of arguing is that you object to something for the aim of attaining some kind of benefit. There has to be a purpose behind what you're doing, right? Not in order to dispraise the person, not to bring the person down, nor to bring the person's speech down. Why did you say it like this? Or why did you say it like that? Or to attack the person themselves. It's only to attack or correct the thing that was being said specifically. The concept, because it needed to be fixed. Because there could be an objective in that. An objective in criticizing the person is not a legitimate objective, with very few exceptions. And an objection of criticizing the way the person expressed himself is also not a legitimate, because it's actually criticizing the person as well. So elevating yourself, this is one of the main reasons why people argue. We're going to talk about more causes. But people try to elevate themselves. And they try to elevate their own knowledge and show off how intelligent they are by arguing with other people. And that should never be the intention behind arguing. Arguing can become a sin when it either hurts another person or it hurts you. So how does it become a sin? If there's no point in it, then you say, well, it's useless talk. But once it gets on the verge of hurting another person, such as they start hating you, then you're on the verge of being in the category of sin. Or if it starts harming you, Now the question is, how would argumentation harm you? It could harm your reputation. I mean more in terms of how could it harm you from in the sight of Allah. The what? Exactly. It could make you arrogant. Make you think that, you're really intelligent or you're really smart or something. Okay, so, and there are other harms, but that's one of the main ones. So now, arguing can lead, let's see, where's the, yes. Let's see, arguing can lead to one or more of the following traits. Let's take a look at the harms. It could lead to hatred. It could lead to anger. And the anger, once you become angry, when you argue, you start becoming angry. And once you become angry, which we'll talk about in another session, your intellect gets clouded and you can't think straight. It can lead to arrogance. It can lead to showing off, which is different from arrogance. It can lead for desire for fame. You just want to have publicity. You want to be considered important. And it can lead to delusion. Delusion meaning thinking something which is not true about yourself. Not just arrogance, but thinking something or about other people that is incorrect, which is delusion. So, arguing usually causes the other person to back up their views with whatever means they can, and usually results in a dispute. This is just the introduction to arguing. What can it do? What happens in an argument usually? The other person starts defending themselves with anything they can, right? And then you have a problem. That's when this argumentation ends up in a dispute, like an actual fight. So you need to be very, very careful. So what is the remedy for that? The remedy for these types of arguments is, number one, reduce the arrogance that is prompting you to show your knowledge off and show your debating skills in front of your opponent. So that's one. Then two, think about whether the thing that is being discussed actually needs to be corrected or doesn't need to be corrected. Ask yourself, this thing we're debating, is this really important or not? I mean, does this really have a point? Does two people get into an argument? One says, you know what? Apple is the best, I'm into Apple computer. Mac OS X is just, viruses are less, it doesn't crash as much, it's this and that. And then somebody else comes and and people get heated about this, really. People start going crazy. You should look at the online forums. People go, no, PC is the best and it's customizable. And then one, computer nerd will come in there, sorry, Osman or someone like that, and he'll walk in. It's public, so I'm not backbiting, and he doesn't mind. He walks in, he's like, no, Linux is way better. Linux is the best. And everyone's looking at him, what is Linux? Right? And this is what happens, right? So you have to be very careful and think about, what are you debating about? What are you arguing about? Is there a need to actually argue about these things? Discuss it, but don't get into an argumentation. Don't get heated. So people should be careful about that. So think whether it needs to be corrected or not. And number three, think whether or not you may be in the wrong. That's one way to this remedy. Maybe you're not exactly on point. So you need to think about that as well. That's something that you should seriously consider. So whenever it's necessary, whenever you need to get into an argument or something like that, or you need to discuss something with somebody which can get heated, the best place to do it is where? In the masjid? Friday prayer? Jummah prayer? In private, exactly. In private. The best place to do it is in private. Unless, with few exceptions, unless you need to, alert the public to the harm of that person's ideas publicly. That's the only exception to the rule. So those of you who are familiar with Ahmad Didat, for example, right? Say, well, why didn't they just have a discussion in private? They did have a discussion in private, by the way, but there was another objective that he had. His main objective, and this is actually documented in one of his speeches, he says these debates are not primarily for Christians. He said that openly. They're not for Christians, even though sometimes we think they were. They were actually for Muslims who had lost confidence in their own religion and had been affected by missionary arguments. And he said it openly. That's why when you find him being tough and being hard, slamming his opponent, because his objective was very different from what people think it was. That's why. So maybe that's not the best style to use, by the way, when you're going and you're actually trying to convince somebody about the truth or something, because his style was different. His style was meant for a certain audience, and the people he was dealing with, like born-again Christians in South Africa, very, different, I would say, beyond group of people. Very, very different subset of people than you find on the rest of the face of the earth. If you ever dealt with them, you'll understand. So, as a whole. So, arguing when you are in a state of ignorance. So, what if you're arguing and you don't actually know anything about what you're arguing about, but you're just arguing anyways? That's like a person who's a lawyer, and they take on a case, and they know that they're defending the person, and they know the person is guilty. But they go ahead and they argue anyways, and their goal is to do what? Their goal is to just use wording and use strategies to convince the judge in order so that he can win the case. That's the example of a person who's arguing and they don't even know what they're arguing about. They're ignorant, but they're just trying to prove a point. They're just trying to show their debating skills. They're trying to show how clever they are. And this is something that a Muslim should never do. Arguing is only permissible out of necessity, so you need to be very careful about the harms that can accrue for that. Now there's the topic of debate. Okay? Debating for the sake of the truth. And I'm not talking about just public debates. I'm talking about the debates that you go and you have with your friends, and you go and you have with your co-workers, and sometimes public debate, that you say, well, we're doing this for the sake of Allah. We're doing this for the sake of the truth. Or you have a debate with your fellow Muslim friends. Say, well, you know what, we're debating the issue of meat. So are we allowed to eat In-N-Out Burger, or are we not allowed to eat In-N-Out Burger? Are we allowed to go to that place, or are we not allowed? So we're debating on whether or not we're allowed to wipe over our socks. And we're debating this, we're debating that. When does debate become legitimate? So we have to look at some of those things. Okay? So let's take a look. Actually, let me cover this one point. Okay, a debate for the sake of learning the truth, for the sake of actually knowing what is the truth, or making the truth evident in the eyes of other people, is allowed whenever there's a purpose and whenever there's a need. That's when it's going to be allowed. But in reality, most people who debate, what do they try to do? They try to trick other people. Sometimes they trick themselves into thinking the wrong opinion, into believing that their only purpose is to arrive at the truth or to make the truth manifest. Now, the truth is actually better sought during a meeting for the purpose of consultation. Usually, where do you find people agreeing or learning things from one another? In a type of meeting, which is what's called shura, consultation. So what is your opinion on this? Okay. And what is your opinion on this? Okay. My opinion is this. And then you listen to everything and you come to a conclusion. But when you engage in a debate or when you engage in an argument or something like that, it's very different. It's very different because you're not in an environment which is conducive towards people accepting a different opinion or towards people changing their opinion. These things are different, okay? So everything is different. The situation that you're in is different. So cooperating with one another people justify their arguments that they have or the debates that they have by saying, we're just trying to figure out what's true. Right? Very, very common. We're just trying to figure out which one is the truth. But in reality, if you look at the way in which it was set up and the way in which it could have been set up, it's better to set it up in a way that's more conducive to trying to get the truth to light. So people are generally deluded when it comes to debating for the sake of the truth. And they think that we're doing it for the sake of the truth, but in reality, they're not. So let's take a look at some of the conditions that are important. Conditions that will make debating really for the sake of Allah or really for the sake of searching for the truth. Condition number 1 is that this is the person, I want you to think about yourself. Imagine you're the one engaging in a debate. You need to fulfill these conditions in order for your debate to be a real debate for the sake of seeking the truth. If you don't fulfill these conditions, you're not really engaging in a proper debate. So number 1, you have to fulfill your individual obligations first. What does that mean? That means that you're what's called fard ayn. Those people who took Islamic law class, right? Fard ayn is something that you have to do yourself, right? You have to pray 5 times a day. You have to fast during the month of Ramadan. You have to be honest. You have to, dress correctly. You have to do all of these things. These are requirements, right? These are your individual obligations first. When you are engaging in a debate and you say, we're trying to figure out what the truth is, What are you actually doing? You're saying that we're collectively working together to arrive at the truth. So collectively working to arrive at the truth is a collective obligation. It's important and it's a necessity as well. But it's what's called fard kifaya, right? It's a collective obligation. So if you are not fulfilling your individual obligations, and then you go and say, no, I'm trying to fulfill this obligation of mine, you should have focused on your individual obligations first. So the example, so he says, whoever does that, claiming that they're searching for the truth, is a liar. Very harsh. He says, it's like a person who neglects their prayers, but then they focuses, I want you to pay close attention to this example, otherwise you're going to miss it. Somebody who skips their prayers, somebody who's not praying their prayers. And instead, what do? They're focusing on their time and they're making clothes, they're making garments, with the claim that we're trying to cover up the other people who don't have any clothes to wear so that their prayers can be valid. You get the example? You have your body has to be clothed properly in order for your prayers to be valid. You're not fulfilling all your prayers, and then you're making garments, and then you're going and giving them to other people and saying, I'm only focusing my time on making these garments because it's a collective obligation to make sure that everyone can properly fulfill their prayers. And yet you didn't fulfill your prayers yet. You see, this is an example of somebody who has not met the criteria. Even though prayer is, an act of worship. So, here's another example. Another example is somebody has an amana or a trust. And let's say they borrowed money and now it's due. They have to return it back. And it's due right now. And your obligation is at 1 p.m., you have to return this money you had promised that you're going to give this money back. Instead of doing that, what do you start doing? You start going and you start praying, extra nawafil. You start, I'm going to make 2 rak'ah. I'm going to read 1 juz of Quran. I'm going to go do this. You start making zikr for a long time. Your primary obligation was what? The first thing you needed to do was to go and return that loan. Not to start engaging in other things, which were not necessary at the time. So you need to understand your priorities and realize that you should focus first on fulfilling your individual obligations before you go and start fulfilling collective obligations, if you're true in your claim. Number 2, fulfilling more important collective obligations first. So there are collective obligations and there are other collective obligations. Fulfilling the ones which are more important first is necessary before you start engaging in this debate. So for example, imagine there's a person, you meet a group of people in the desert, and they're starving, and they're dying of thirst. They have nothing to drink. And you could have gone and provided them something to drink. And instead, what do? You pull out a book from your backpack, and you start studying a book of medicine. And you're saying, you know what? It's a fard kifaya, it's a collective obligation that these people need to be taught medicine. So I'm going to study medicine, I'm going to become a doctor, and I'm going to go and help the village because this village that they live in doesn't have a doctor. So what you're doing is a collective obligation, yes. But you have not fulfilled the obligation that's necessary right there in front of you. That's what you do when you engage in a debate, thinking that you're searching for the truth when you've not fulfilled the other, more important collective obligations first. Number 3, being qualified on the topic in which you're speaking. So if you're speaking about a topic and you're not even qualified to speak, you shouldn't be speaking. So, this example, where I'm taking this from, applies mostly to scholars. It mostly applies to Muslim scholars who engage in debates. At that time, debate was a very common thing among Muslim scholars. And it was a very good thing, actually. It had a lot of benefits. But it ended up having a lot of vices associated with it, with arrogance and praise and all of these things. So he's giving advice mainly to the people who are debating on the topic. Even if you're debating amongst Muslims, you should be qualified and you should know what you're saying in the first place. So it does apply to us as well. So you're talking about the meat issue, you're talking about this issue. You should at least understand, at minimum, understand the reason for your own argument. If you don't understand your own argument or the reason behind your own argument, and you say, well, you know what? Well, no, this Imam Abu Hanifa, this is his argument. And this is the Hanafi school of thought, and you start going and you start debating. Now, what are you going to debate exactly? You're going to talk about how great Imam Abu Hanifa was? You're going to talk about how great the Hanafi school is. You're going to talk about how many people follow the Hanafi school. That's not a basis for a debate. That's why these debates don't work. Now, if you know what you're talking about, you understand the argument, you understand where it came from, and then the other person understands his argument, understands where it came from, then maybe you can engage in some kind of debate. Otherwise, you're debating about nothing. You're just debating about, well, in my country we do it this way. So, no. But in my country we do it this way. So no, okay, we're going to get into a big debate. What is going to be the outcome of that debate? There's no substance to the debate whatsoever. Because why do the people in your country do it that way? No. They do it that way. That's not an argument. So you can't get into a debate if you don't have or understand an argument, or at least try to understand the argument of the other person. So you just be defending some position or talking about the greatness of some particular person. The next one is addressing actual issues or ones which are likely to happen. So if you're engaging in a debate that is, let's say about some Islamic issue or something, the first thing is, make sure it is a debate that is actually something that's likely to happen, not something that's just hypothetical. And you will find it. You will find Muslims talking about, if Muslims go and land on the moon, right? How are they going to make wudu? Right? Because how are they going to perform wudu? Because the water, it doesn't stay or whatever. Or how are they going to pray? Which direction are they going to face in the qibla? Right? Should they face towards earth, or should they face towards some other direction or whatever? And people will start engaging in debates. And if you've ever been in one of those debates, you think, what was the point? Why was I doing this? What was the point behind all of this? There was no point, because none of us have actually been on the moon yet. And we're not going to be going anytime soon. So what's the point? Right? What's the point? There's no need. So well, if we visit Antarctica, right? So if we happen to be at one particular point in time, should we face this direction going towards Mecca, or should we face this direction going towards Mecca? Which one will be better? Well, go there first, right? When you buy your plane ticket, right, which you can't even land there, you have to parachute down or something. Once you're ready to do that, then you can start debating and you can start discussing. There's no point in holding this debate at all. Holding a debate in private whenever possible. So debate whenever possible should be in a private atmosphere, because it's more suitable to understanding. What ends up happening in public gatherings is, and when I don't want to say public gatherings, I don't mean a big public gathering. I mean, the little, gathering of Muslims that you were invited to, and you just had like a cup of tea and all of that. You don't have to debate. Two people are debating, and there's two other people there sitting there listening. This is what you call a public debate. This is the definition of public debate. What's going to happen in public gatherings? The person who's debating, or the person who's being debated, is more inclined towards defending himself, whether he's right or wrong. Because now your reputation in front of the other two people is on the line. Or in front of even one person is on the line. So what do you start doing naturally? And what do people start doing naturally? They start defending themselves. And they want to start defending themselves, whether they're right or wrong. Now it's not about this is right or wrong. It's about whether I'm right or wrong. And now the whole objective has changed. So you need to be very, very cautious about that. In fact, it gets so bad that some people who enjoy debating others, if they see that person privately, they will not even discuss the issue with them. Even if the person says, hey, what do you think about, what's your opinion on that issue? He says, just wait till we sit down in front of other people, then we'll discuss it. Because they just want to show that their argument is stronger. They're not interested in the truth. And therefore, they're not really qualified to debate. Number 6. Number 6, desiring to seek the truth. You have to have a desire to seek the truth if you want to engage in debate. That's a condition. So the truth should be sought when debating a topic that one might be mistaken about. You might be wrong. You might be mistaken about something. And you should act in a debate when searching for the truth the same way like someone who lost some item of theirs and they're looking for it. So imagine you lost your phone and you don't know where it is. And you're searching and you're searching and you're searching for it. It doesn't matter who finds the phone, you're going to be happy. Right? Because you found something. Even if it's your enemy, somebody who you hate that person. And they say, I found your phone. You're gonna accept that, this is my phone. You're not going to say, it's not my phone. you're not intelligent enough to find my phone, you wouldn't do that. Because you're focusing on what? Your focus is on the phone. You want to find your object that you misplaced. That should be your way when you're debating. You should be searching for the truth. It doesn't matter whose mouth it comes from. Imam al-Shafi'i was one of the great examples. He used to say, and he's true when he's not just saying it, he was true when you see the way he used to debate people. He said, I always used to pray that the truth would be manifest on my opponent's tongue and that I would accept it. Whenever I debated, I always hoped that he would be the one where the truth came. Why? Because I try to focus on the truth, and if it's on his tongue, meaning he comes up with the right argument, I'm willing to accept it. When I see it, I will accept it. But he's saying, if I am the one who's right, I'm afraid that the other person, they may not like the truth, so they won't be willing to accept it, even if this is the truth. So he said, I would rather see the truth coming from that person so that everyone accepts it at the end of the day, rather than coming from me. So it's not about me. Right? So this is very, very important. In fact, you might even thank your enemy, right? If they find somebody you hate, you might even thank them even if they find something that you've lost. Even though you hate them, you know, he's not such a bad guy after all. He gave me my phone back. But when you're in a debate, what happens? Exact opposite. Somebody makes a mistake or something like that, even if they come with something correct, you start going and attacking them on some other point. Because the point is to attack them and destroy your opponent in a debate. That's why you need to be very, very cautious and very careful. Umar radiallahu anhu, this is one example, there's many examples. Umar was addressing a crowd of people when a woman came, an old woman came, and this was during a khutbah actually. She got up and she said, you know what, the verse that you quoted, you misunderstood it. The ruling you gave is wrong according to this verse in the Quran. And she mentioned the verse in the Quran. Right? It was something about marriage and keeping, dowry. So he said, you're wrong. Umar retracted and he says, this woman is right and Umar is wrong. Publicly. So that's the way that people should actually be dealing with things. He didn't say, you're an old woman and you dare to come to the Khalifa? I mean, can you imagine other people, what they would do in that position? Or you know what? Today it's even more dangerous. Because people who are working, for the sake of Allah, people who are doing things for the sake of Islam, they fall into another trap. They're taught that sometimes for the sake of maslahah, for the sake of the benefit of the community, you need to be very careful about revealing your faults. I'll give you just an example. Let's take, Egypt or Tunisia, for example. I'm not saying that they've done this. I'm giving you a hypothetical case. Okay? In Egypt right now, look how much pressure there is on the government. The Muslim Brotherhood origins, right? And there's all this propaganda going against them. Now, if they make a mistake, and then they try to retract that mistake, and they realize, yes, we were wrong in doing this, there are people who would advise them, if you retract, you're going to set a bad precedent, or you're going to, maybe lose the confidence of some people in front of you. Therefore, for the sake of the greater good, what we call maslahah, you should not admit to your mistakes. And there are people who would advise them with that. And there are some instances where that may be true, but generally it's not. Some instances it may be true, but not always. So you will find that, the danger of this is that they'll say, that's why we're not going to admit any mistakes that we're making. Because the media is on top of us, the pressure is coming, this is happening, therefore we're not willing to admit some wrong that has taken place. So we need to be very careful. So that's something that can trick a lot of good, well-intentioned Muslims into not admitting their own faults. Saying that I didn't want to admit this point for the sake of maslahah because this person might think down of me and I have to have a good reputation because I'm an imam or I'm a sheikh or whatever, and if they have a bad reputation of me, then they won't come to me for counseling. And that could cause more harm, therefore I'm just going to go ahead and continue this debate and say the guy is wrong. This is a big danger, a very, very big danger, and people need to be very cautious. Now there are some exceptions where you need to be more intelligent. Like for example, now I won't even get into that. Right? Just leave the example. Right? The debate is whether or not modern day Turkey should acknowledge the Armenian genocide openly and take blame for what they've done. Now the repercussions of that, I was just at the Anatolian Festival yesterday, and one of the professors, beautiful, this guy was really a genius, man. I don't know who